Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 410 of Humanity Rising. We've had a program on endangered species this week. This is the fourth of 5 sessions on Humanity Rising. I want to welcome all of you. The theme for today is the age of the great forgetting. And I think it's important for us to take that in, that in addition to the specific issues with which we're dealing, that all of us are in the grip of a forgetting that we have to come to terms with and understand very deeply. You know, Sigmund Freud about 100 years ago said that at birth, each individual forgets the universe. If you go back 2,500 years ago, it was Plato in his masterwork, The Republic, that also contemplated the fact that human beings of all ages throughout history have the great challenge of working through that which they forget. You may all remember his allegory of the cave. We're all sitting, he said, shackled by our wrists and our neck and our ankles. And we're all looking at the back of the cave. And at the back of the cave, we see the flickers, shadows caused by fires, lamps at the front of the cave behind us that are just flickering phantoms at the back of the cave. And we think that's real. We think that the forgetting is actually the reality. And then something happens to us, said Plato, mostly against our will. An accident, an illness, some trauma. And for reasons that he couldn't quite explain, we stand up and we turn around. We go to the front of the cave, and all of a sudden we look out and we see the bright sunshine. And for the first time, we realize that we've been in a dream state of forgetting. Plato makes 2 points here. He says, what we realize with a shock is that nobody put the shackles on us. We put them on ourselves, and that's why we can wake up. And the second point he makes is that coming to this realization, we all have a choice. Do we just stay awake ourselves? Or do we go back into the cave and try to wake up the people who still think that the shadows on the back of the cave are what's actually real? And he says that's not so easy, because society and the people in the cave looking at the shadows are so convinced that that is real that they will resist every effort to wake them up. And that's when Plato had his great line, they will crucify a good man. And that, of course, is what they did to Socrates and other great figures who've tried to wake us up. So today we're going to contemplate the age of the great forgetting and what it takes to wake us up to the bright sunshine of a new world. Let us begin by, first of all, remembering our bodies. Let's just take a minute to attune ourselves with our hearts. And through our hearts, let us remember who we really are. Let us feel each other. Let us feel our community. Let us give thanks for a beautiful world. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you, wherever you are around the world that are joining us for this Humanity Rising session, I want to invite Tom Eddington, the founder of Endangered Global, and George Caponelli, who's the founder of Age Nation, who have convened this session and this program for us to join us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for putting this all together, and I turn the program over to you.
Jim, thank you very, very much. And thank you for creating this extraordinary platform that is allowing people in 130 countries or more to get together and experience some of these rich conversations. You know, when you were talking about Plato's allegory and the handcuffs, you know, that chain us, I was remembering a quote by Leo Tolstoy who said, I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me. And yet I assure myself and others that I'm very sorry for him and would do anything for him except to get off his back, you know? When I think about a lot that's going on in our world today, I realize that a lot of us are asleep in different ways, but there are also a lot of us who are trying to keep us asleep. And part of our responsibility and accountability is to realize that. And I think accountability and responsibility are one of the themes that we would really most like to focus on today. Churchill said that the price of greatness, and in this instance, I would say survival, is responsibility. And I think that's part of what we want to talk about today, because at the heart of the dilemma of what is endangered, other species, our habitat itself, and our own existence, we are the troublemakers. We are the ones that are bringing a lot of the challenges that we face. And so if we can together acknowledge our accountability and our responsibility, I believe we can make just an enormous difference going forward. And although there are many who suggest that we are close to the end of this game, there are some of us who still have hope for what's possible if we wake up in time and do what needs to be done. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom. Tom?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you, George. Really appreciate the opening comments, and it really sets the stage for the week. And for those of you joining us today that didn't have a chance to see some of the programming from earlier in the week, we started the week on Monday with a message from David Suzuki, where David shared with us that we're in the 59th minute. And there's reason to be significantly concerned about whether or not we're going to make it. On Tuesday, Dr. Sylvia Earle and some of the other panelists shared the hope that they have for where we are and where we have the opportunity to go. Hope because for the first time in human history, there's information that we now know that we didn't know decades ago, a century ago, several centuries ago, that in fact, we now know we're living on a finite world and there aren't unlimited resources, and we need to be better stewards of this home, planet Earth. On Wednesday, we had an opportunity to hear from some leading individuals on work they're doing and the actions they're taking and their organizations are taking to take that knowledge to move us to where we need to be in not only sustainability, but regenerating planet Earth for humanity. And as George said, we'd like to move the conversation today, and we've got an extraordinary group of panelists joining us to talk about humanity taking accountability for our actions. So I'd like to start by introducing Michael Meade. Michael is joining us, and Michael's a renowned storyteller, author, and scholar of mythology, anthropology, and psychology. Charles Eisenstein is joining us. Charles is an author, a deep thinker, and speaker on topics around ecology and economics and human existence on the planet. We have with us Father Josh Karithodum. Father Josh is the author of the 10 Green Commandments. He has a PhD in ecology and works with the Dicastery of Human Integral Development at the Vatican, and has done some extraordinary work in his career and life in ecology and humanity and the interface between social justice and the environment. And we're expecting Dr. Elvis Tangem from the Vatican, or I'm sorry, not from the Vatican, but the African Union. He's the coordinator of the Great Green Wall Project in Africa. And Elvis will be talking about some of the work that's being done in Africa to create probably the greatest contribution to humanity in this 8,000 kilometer long Great Green Wall reforestation project in sub-Saharan Africa from Senegal to Djibouti. And finally, we have Lynn Twist. Lynn is the author of The Soul of Money. She is co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance, spent many decades working with the Hunger Project to alleviate world hunger, and has a book coming out this fall entitled Living a Committed Life. So welcome all of you, extraordinary panel, and just absolutely delighted to have you in dialogue with us today and sharing your wisdom about where we are and what is being done and what needs to be done. As we shared earlier this week, this decade is probably the most important decade in human history. We are running out of time, and yet there are lots of places we can point to have hope. And as we shared earlier this week, particularly Gen Z, our young folks, are feeling hopeless. We're seeing lots of signs of anxiety, depression, self-mutilation, mutilization, and suicide, where they're feeling that they don't have hope. And we can point to Dr. Lisa Miller at Columbia University School of Education talks about the absence of spirituality. And part of the solution is having a spiritual context and understanding. So part of what we want to be sharing with our audience today in dialogue is the work that's being done, what humanity needs to do to take accountability for the state of the world, and provide some context and some hope, not just for the children. And my final comment would be just getting back to some of the opening remarks. If we look at humanity as a normal distribution, about maybe 15% of humanity is truly asleep. About 15% is truly awake. And the other 70% are pretending to be asleep. And those are the hardest folks to wake. And so part of what we want to share this week is reason for those folks to stop pretending to be asleep and to truly wake up.
Tom, I think as well, I'd like to remind our viewers around the world that each of the individuals who have graciously agreed to be here today, when they share some of the work that they're doing, we'd like you to ask yourself, how can I be involved in that work? How can I support it? What can I do in my own life to make a difference? Because no matter how awake or asleep we are, if we do not couple awareness with action, we're not going to respond to the challenge of these times. So I'd like to just invite our panelists one at a time just to share a few things that you are focusing on today that you believe are really consequential. And then let's begin a dialogue on some of the things we can do together and some of the things we think need to get done in order to meet the challenge of our time. Michael, can we begin with you?
Thank you. Good to be with everyone. I'm having a little dilemma in that as a storyteller and a student of myth, what happens to me is someone says something or something occurs or a bit of a dream occurs, and that provokes a story to kind of come into my mind, my imagination. So I'm standing here with a contrasting story to Plato's cave, and I'm trying to figure out how to condense it enough so that I'm not using up everybody's time. So if it's all right, I'll try to do this story because it's pre-Platonic and it's coming from a different root, you could say, more like the indigenous roots of imagination. And this story says that nearby where we are, wherever we are, there's a cave in which the knowledge that we need in order to survive and in order to thrive is waiting to be found. And yet, because no matter how fast people drive, in which direction they drive in, they don't find it. But if you found it, inside the cave, there's an old woman who is weaving the most beautiful garment that anyone has ever seen, and she's been weaving it for thousands of years. But every once in a while, she has to stop and go to the back of the cave where there is a fire that some people say is the most ancient thing in the world. And hanging over the fire is a cauldron. And in the cauldron are the seeds of all the grasses and all the trees, all the grains and all the flowers that grow on the earth. And if she doesn't stir this cauldron of seeds, then all of the environmental growing things will die. But because she's old and she's been working so long on this beautiful garment, she's slow as she moves to the back of the cave after she drops the beautiful garment onto the floor of the cave. As she goes to the back of the cave to stir the seeds, the black dog, what black dog, comes over and sees a loose thread and begins to pull on the loose thread until it has disentangled the entire garment that the woman had been weaving. When she comes back, she sees all of her work, all of her creative energy, all of the beauty unraveled in chaos on the floor of the cave. And for a moment, she just stands and absorbs what has happened. And then she sits down and she sees a loose thread. She picks up the loose thread, and as soon as she does that, she sees a vision of an even more beautiful garment, and she begins to weave that more beautiful garment. It's a story told by native tribes in North America, and it's told by the elders when everyone is in trouble. And some people say, damn the black dog. If it wasn't for the black dog, everything would have been finished in a really beautiful way. But the elders say, be careful what you wish for. Because when something is complete, it's dead. Be thankful for what unravels life and be aware that your awakening occurs when you pick up the thread that you can weave into the most beautiful garment, which is the next vision and the next version of the world. So I guess I want to add, by virtue of the story, an imagination of a renewal of life. The story is about the very old mystery, which is life, death, renewal. And in a sense, condensing it further, the commentary that's coming into my mind, we are in the position of the old woman, according to the story, according to mythology. We are witnesses to the unraveling and the collapse, and we are invited to find our thread. And the responsibility and accountability becomes, I think, how each of us creatively weave the inner wisdom, the creative ability, the beauty and the meaning of our life into the vision of the next world, with the idea being there is no one idea or one path that's going to get us all through. But if each of us are doing the creative part that we came to the earth to do, then we become a kind of a companion or agent of creation along with the old woman who's reweaving the garment, which of course is the world. Hope I didn't use up too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was beautiful. Father Josh, would you like to build off of Michael's comments and share?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for the invitation, and delighted to be part of this panel. As I speak to you from the Vatican, very humbly, please allow me to bring the love and greetings from Pope Francis. I really feel moved to say this, so I share it with you. Listening to Michael, I too was inspired. I prepared something else, but in a conversation, we get inspired from each other. I too thought of another story, but a real story, in as much as something that happened, something rather recent. Often Indigenous tribe, it's also a way of honoring our Indigenous sisters and brothers. The tribe called Dongria Kont in northern part of India. I come originally from India, in a state called Orissa. In 2005, Vedanta, a big multinational based in London, they wanted to create a mine in the area where the Dongria Kont Indigenous people live, their communities live, to mine bauxite. It was a huge project, 1 billion project. And Vedanta at that time was something like 8 billion. They're making like 8 billion profit, and this Dongria Kont was just 8,000 people, standing against a multinational. And they were just, their basic argument is maybe the theme of our meeting today, that we are forgetting some essential truths. That first of all, this mountain is sacred. It is the abode of our gods. So they said there's no way we can give in, it is our God's abode. The second thing they said, it is Mother Earth. It is this hill is what sustains us, what gives us water, what gives us fruits, and it's our Mother Earth. And we cannot forget, we shouldn't forget that. And thirdly, what Indigenous communities always teach us, they said, you come with a big mining project, our communities will be dispersed. As it has happened to many communities, go to Amazon and elsewhere, and we cannot survive except as a community. I was very impressed. And so they fought, and thank God they found people to support them. Survival International came out with a beautiful movie. The then Environment Minister of India, Ramesh, Shriram Ramesh, he supported them. And Vedanta lost its case in the Supreme Court of India. So this tribe won. We are happy for them, but happy because they told us of the things we are forgetting. That we are forgetting that Earth is sacred, that Earth is our own Mother Earth, that we cannot survive unless we stay together as a community. So that is the first part of my reflection. I might just add one more element, Tom, if you have time.
Yes.
Okay. I think that the response to forgetting is to remember. And as Raymond Panica used to write, remember, member together. And I think of the great myth of Prajapati. Now we are going back to very ancient. Thank God, we don't limit our stories just last few centuries. So we're really going back. In Rig Veda, Prajapati's body is splintered. It's cut into pieces. Then the great cosmic sacrifice begins by remembering, bringing all these parts together of the centered body of Prajapati. I think that's what is our task today. As a priest, I think of the multiplication of the loaves of 5,000 people, a great miracle. But then Jesus, in the end, he tells his disciples, now gather the fragments, collegita fragmenta in Latin. I say this verse because I'm reminded of a Salesian priest who works for children on the street. And when we become priests, we choose a motto that can guide the rest of our lives. And he chose that motto, gather the fragments. He said, I'm working for children on the street, And our society has thrown people into the peripheries, like children on the street, women trafficked, or child laborers, migrants. We're just thrown them into the peripheries. And this priest said, my mission is to gather them back, collegita fragmenta, gather the fragments, Yeah, so I conclude. I think the response to forgetting is to remember in a very existential way. And if there is time later, Tom, I cannot speak of a very concrete action platform that we are working at, but on that later if you wish. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Father Josh. Lynn.
Wow, that's so wonderful. And I just have to say, I'm sort of stunned when Jim opened and said, this is day 410, because I was one of the people who was on day 1. And holy moly, this Humanity Rising platform is just, I have a great respect for you, Jim. And I know you're there, someone invisible now, but for the staying power and the unstoppable commitment you have to make a difference with every single day you're alive. So thank you for that. Wonderful to hear you, Father Josh, and wonderful to hear you, Michael. I mean, I guess maybe the theme here I'll pick up on is the wisdom of Indigenous people, which is so relevant today, has always been relevant, but now somehow we have the ears to hear and the heart to receive the wisdom that they carry for all of us, that lives in our hearts too. And many Indigenous people that I work with in the Amazon and in the Andes say that the pandemic itself is an announcement, that it's an announcement from the mother that the huge climactic changes that we are witnessing and that are threatening the very life support system on which we depend is feedback from the mother. And they knew it was coming in their prophecies for thousands of years, from the change of one 500-year cycle, the Pachacuti, they call it, of dominance and darkness, the 500 years since the conquest. And now we're moving into what they call the next Pachacuti, the Pachacuti of balance and light, which sounds very much better than dominance and darkness, particularly for them. But they have prophesied that between the dominance and darkness 500-year cycle, Pachacuti, the change of Pachacutis to balance and light will be a very harsh and difficult 25 to 50 years, where Pachamama, their word for Mother Earth, or the Quechua word for Mother Earth, actually the earth, the sky, the universe, and all time is what that word means to them. But let me shorten it and say Mother Earth. Pachamama will humble all her creatures for 25 to 50 years with huge climactic events, tsunamis, earthquakes, fires, floods, magnitude of that humanity's never seen before, but to humble all her creatures so they will remember their rightful role. They will member, to get back to our theme, their rightful role in relationship with her, going into the Pachacuti of balance and light. So this period of turmoil and turbulence and destruction and death and pestilence and breakdown has been prophesied really for thousands and thousands of years, right around this time. And I want to remind myself and all of us that we're in the first century of the third millennium. And if you look at the long continuum of time, which Buckminster Fuller taught me to do when he was alive, and I was fortunate enough to work with him, this first 100 years of the third millennium, we're 21, 22 years in, and we're being, as Paul Hawkins says, homeschooled by the mother to find our rightful role in this unfolding story of the third millennium. Then one more beautiful prophecy that I remember sharing on day one of Humanity Rising. So I'm going to do it again. Many of you have seen this before. This is a Baha'i prophecy about this time in history. There are many prophecies I'm learning about this time in history, this first 100 years, first century of the third millennium. But the Baha'i prophecy is, and that's based, yes, on the Roman calendar, but let me use that now. There's lots of other ways to talk about that. I see that in the chat. But that's the calendar that I'll at least talk of now. There's many other ways to look at the times we're living in. But to use the calendar that we use, the third millennium, the first 100 years, the Baha'i prophecy that became also a Cherokee prophecy, and the Cherokee people carry this too, say that humanity, our species, humanity has two great wings, a male wing and a female wing. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, the male wing in our species, the bird of humanity, they call it, has been fully extended, very, very active, while the female wing has not yet been fully extended in the bird of humanity and has been folded in for hundreds of years, while the male wing has been fully extended, actually become overdeveloped, overmuscular, and ultimately violent. And the bird of humanity has thus been flying in circles for hundreds of years, because the bird of humanity hasn't been able to find its way to free the female wing. And so the male wing, working overtime to keep the bird of humanity afloat, has become violent. And so that this is the time in history when the female wing of the bird of humanity in all of us will fully find its place, find its voice, find its way. And as it fully extends, the male wing in all of us will relax, and the bird of humanity for the first time in history will soar. So I love those prophecies. They're hopeful, they're powerful, and they make nothing wrong, but allow us to remember who we are, which I think is the theme of our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Elvis, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for this wonderful, but I can only describe the stories as surreal, they make me dazzled, so thank you very much for the invitation, and it's great since I started attending yesterday. I'm currently in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia at the Africa Union Commission. And thank you, Tom, for the invitation. I don't know how you got me, but I just say thank you for this wonderful place of discussion. I'm not a great storyteller, I'm a technician. So my work is very much linked to the discussion that Michael started this evening, and that Father Jeff Froome and Lynn have so articulated so well, because the Great Green Wall for the Sahara and Sahel was about survival of humanity. It's a story of survival. It's a story of how, before the word climate change began, the impacts were already being felt in some of the most vulnerable areas of the world. And here I'm talking about these populations that are living in the Sahara region, you know, about the Sahara Desert, those who are living at the threshold of the Sahara region, which is called the Sahel. And even now, those who are living within the boundaries and within the Kalahari and the Namib Desert. So the whole idea of the Great Green Wall is about looking for sustainable solutions to the challenges of this existential threat that we have today, which have been called climate change. And so and because there have been a lot of talk since yesterday about the indigenous people, I want to say that the Great Green Wall is full of indigenous people. We have the Tuaregs, we have the Maasai, we have the San people, we have the Kunama people here in Ethiopia. And I want to say, because we are in the age of the pandemic, these people, recent studies have shown that in all of this group, those who are living the indigenous lives, even those who are living within the cities, none of them have been affected by the pandemic because of their way of life, because of their direct links with nature. And so this is very important. And so the Great Green Wall was created because of the advancement of extreme weather conditions, because of the creeping, the slow invasion of the desert, eating up the fertile lands, eating up the vegetation. And if you consider that about 80% of Africa depends on nature, mostly rain-fed agriculture. And so we depend basically on the caprices of nature for our subsistence and for income generation activities. And so when the earth undergoes degradation, when deserts takes over the fertile lands, it is a very, very big problem. It is not only a big problem for the agriculturists, those who are into rain-fed agriculture, but especially those who are into pastoralism. And as you know, pastoralism for most of the tribes in Africa is not commercialized pastoralism. It's about the linkages between them and the animals. It's their soul. These animals are their brothers and their sisters. And your social status in your community is defined by the number of animals that you can keep and cater for, and how well those animals are fed and they are in good health and increasing in number yearly. And so when this desertification and land degradation destroys the pasture land and the agricultural land, what happens? There is a clash between these actors. And the biggest challenge we face today within the framework of the Great Green Wall is there are two things. There is the clash between the land users, especially the farmers and the pastoralists, and then there's the issue of migration. All the youths that are found in this region that have been devastated by climate change, that have been devastated by the changing weather conditions, they are leaving. And so we have this huge group of migrants that are doing everything to be useful to their community. Because if you are not useful to your community, you are as good as dead. And so these young people have the hard choice of either staying in their communities for nothing, either joining the extremist group that have taken over this area, or to migrate. And when you talk to them, they say, it's better I die trying than remaining in my community and I see my mother and my father dies for nothing. And so there's a huge migration issue. And so we started the Great Green Wall a decade and a half ago, and the whole idea was to bring sustainable land management and restoration in this area. And here I'm talking about 350 million people who are dependent, who are affected in this region. This is just in the Sahara and Sahel region. If we go down to the Kalahari and the Namib in the Southern Africa region, we'll be looking at more than 600 million people. And when you look at the total degraded land in Africa, it's about 1 billion hectares of land that we are focusing on. And for now, in the medium term or in the short term, we are looking at restoring 100 million hectares of land, which would create about 10 million decent jobs, and also looking at the issues of carbon sequestration, which we estimate at about 250 million tons of carbon. And this program has been going on through various activities, from agroforestry, farmers managed, natural assisted regeneration, forestry. We have climate smart agriculture. We have the provision of water for animals and for humans and for irrigation. We have renewable energy. We are looking into the issues of migration, internally displaced. And today, the biggest challenge we have is that of conflict. Two types of conflict. The conflict between the users of the land who are conflicting because of the diminishing nature of the land, and then the increasing development of extremist terrorism that find this desperate group of people as the best place to come and settle in. They push extremist doctrine, mostly Islam, and then they create the tensions, and some of them are also involved in trafficking, in arms trafficking, in drug trafficking. And so this seriously jeopardizes our work, and now the focus is shifting from restoration into peace building and into military interventions. And I think you must have heard about it. So we are making some progress, but there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities that are coming up, because of some opportunities are like, the development of science, the coming up of social media, the affordability of machineries like solar panels that we are now using to bring energy in the communities to encourage the young people to stay. We're now involved with online marketing, value chains, just to make these people that are seriously affected by climate change, by desertification, and generally the caprices of nature to stay in their land, to be able to live and to be able to live well. So it's a long story about the Great Green Wall, but I'm sure we still have some time to discuss about it. Thank you, Tom, for now. I'm a bit long, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Elvis, and thank you for bringing the complexity of the challenge to the dialogue today. And Charles, I'd like to invite you to share, and then we can move into more of a dialogue.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've been listening with great interest to all of this, and I'm very happy to be here with you all. The first thing that came up in me is, about this idea of the asleep and the awakened. And I thought of a little paradox, which is, yes, there are two kinds of people in the world, the asleep and the awake. And the way that you can tell which group that you're in is that those who believe that there are two kinds of people, the asleep and the awake, are asleep. Really what that is getting at is the need for humility and to hold lightly to the things that we think we know. This is especially the case with people who have been acculturated to Western values and Western systems, which include a kind of an arrogance, that a colonization, not only of the cultural world, but also of the material and conceptual world. Like we know how to know, and we know the truth more than anybody else. And our white man's burden is to go and enlighten the rest of the world. Well, I think that this ambition now is hitting a brick wall as it has failed to achieve the paradise that was promised through our technological and scientific colonization of reality. And that's why there's so much interest in the indigenous now in the West, because we are learning, we are realizing that we need to source knowledge from outside of what we thought we knew. And one of the things that I want to speak to in that vein is a very, very deep assumption in the environmental movement that this is about the survival of the species. I think something much greater is at stake than that, because I can see a future in which we survive on an increasingly dead planet, sucking carbon out of the air with giant machines, growing all of our food in huge hydroponic facilities, living in bubble cities and our personal bubbles, climate controlled, like that whole scenario where Earth is turned into an engineering object. I'd like to say, well, we would never survive, that won't work. But my real fear is, what if it does work? I think that environmentalism makes a mistake when it frames all of these issues about our own survival, because we are here, and this speaks to also, why are we here? What is the right role and right participation of the human being in the world? We're not here just to survive. We were born by Mother Gaia for a purpose, same as every other species, to increase the life and beauty on this planet. So many of the projects that have been mentioned here already can be understood in that way too. For example, the bauxite mine in India, where the tribe was resisting it. If they said, well, we won't survive if this mine is constructed, the extraction companies could say, oh, yes, you will. We will relocate you to a concrete apartment block in Delhi and, find you jobs in factories. And okay, you've survived. The project, the Great Green Wall, which I've followed for many years, and it's one of the brightest points, I think, on this whole planet happening right now. You could say that it is essential for the survival of the people living there. But if you're a North American, is that essential for your survival? If you're going to say survival is the thing that we should be thinking about, something else actually has to be appealed to, which is brotherhood, sisterhood, compassion, solidarity, to understand that whether or not it is necessary for my survival, I care about the human beings in the Sahel. I care about the trees in the Amazon and the forests and the waters. I care about this earth. And I want to devote myself to the thriving of this earth. Put me to good use. That orientation leads to many activities that, from a traditional climate change perspective, do great good. And you can frame it in terms of carbon sequestration and so forth. But it also can leave out the projects that don't necessarily convert easily to carbon numbers, but that from a perspective of a living planet are all the more important to preserve the organs and tissues of this being that we live on. So, yeah, I guess it's a transition away from a human-centric viewpoint to a membership, to a coming back into our full community with the rest of life. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Charles. So let's talk amongst ourselves, you particularly, panelists who have joined us today, about there have been several things that have been mentioned, I think, that are really critical. One is remembering in all of its connotations, the concepts of accountability and responsibility. And this issue, this position that Charles has just identified, what else can we do, in your opinions, individually and collectively, to thrive? How do we contribute both the practical aspects and those other deeper inner aspects that can help viewers from around the world think about how they can individually contribute to thriving?
I just want to say something a little bit in response to you, Charles, that I think is the benefit of this idea, will we survive? Which I agree is not this conversation to be centered in. I totally agree with that. There's a power there that we can tap into, that we all see in people that we know who've had cancer or who've had a life-threatening illness, and they've rethought who they were, reordered their life, recreated their priorities. They've discovered what life's really about by facing the end of their life. And in many ways, as a species, we have that opportunity because it's now so serious, so, so intense, that I think that the threat of survival can be transformed into, like it is in a personal journey one has with the end of their life, or people who've died and come back, really letting go of the trappings of the life they've had, and deepening into what it really means to be alive and the contribution that's theirs to make. So I really agree totally with your kind of redirecting our thinking, our energy around thriving, flourishing, and what is the contribution that's ours to make. I think that, the work that I do in the Amazon, I don't know, somehow I just want to say this, there's this huge opportunity right now with these critical ecosystems, because it looks like the solution to saving them is finding a way through by getting the capital markets, whoever that is and whatever that is, to take them on and save them with money. And we all know that's not going to work. You can't monetize the sacred. You just can't do that. Yet we're having like this clash with the massive amounts of money that now are trying to find a way to repair and restore and reverse the damage that those huge amounts of money have done, and the ecosystems that are under tremendous threat by those same energies. And what is the way through with that? How do we find our way, whether it's the Great Green Wall or the Amazon, or any of the things that we all care about? Indigenous people are so clearly giving us the signals, the messages, the principles, the way of seeing. Yet we live in this massive system that wants to transform, I think, that feels that it needs to transform. But how do we turn the tide? How do we really make it happen? So I don't know, I'm just challenging us all to come up with something really brilliant here.
I'd like to respond to that. Couple of old ideas. No change at the level of the human soul, no change at the level of the world. We're all implicated, that everybody's saying that in some fashion. But I think part of not being caught in the trap of the history of Western thinking and Western colonialism and all that kind of thing is that the solution is not a singular solution. It's not a myopic, one fixes everything. So because the problems are multiple in their nature, climate crisis, the biggest one, COVID, a signal of all kinds of other things that are probably coming, crisis of truth and meaning, crisis of money and economy, crisis of immigration. It's everywhere in culture, it's everywhere in nature. So one reason I like to tell that story of the old woman in the cave is because her move when everything has fallen apart is to pick up one thread. And so the way I think we awaken is individually awaken, as Charles was saying, to why we're here. So each of us are here, as I'm drawing on old stories that I love, we're each gifted and aimed before we are even born. And I think that's what picking up the thread means. You could call it the thread of genius, for instance. I like the Western word genius, which means the spirit that's already there before and after a child is born. Girl, boy, any kind of gender identification you want to find, any kind of social or economic status, each one walking in the world, born into the world, has a genius capacity which is intended to be given to the world, which is the old understanding of the individual human being. Not a blank slate, but a genius imbued, unique being stepping into the great drama of life. And so what happens in a sense, and I hear this in the story of the Pachamama too, which is that it all falls apart. It collapses before our very eyes. We are witnesses to the collapse of the ecosystems, the economic systems, the cultural systems. But all of them were originally fashioned and woven by the genius threads of our ancestors. And so the way of awakening has to be the individual way. And this image of picking up the thread, if we imagine it as the genius thread, then each person who picks it up fumbles with it, gets confused by it, but follows it, is on the way to weaving a thread that is needed in some part of the world, in nature, in an ecological. There's someone being born right now that understands better than any of us how to purify water after the heavy metals have gone in. There's someone else being born who understands how to handle human birth in such a way that the child becomes a member of the community automatically, and so on. And so it's all these threads, trusting that there is guidance behind it, which can be called the Great Mother, can be called, I love the two wings of the bird of humanity, that all wings have feathers, and each person is a feather in the moving wing of the awakening of humanity. So to me, the bigger the problem, you can get overwhelmed, swallowed. How in the world can we move these big things? Well, each individual can move their life in such a way. And then what happens one day is someone who's working on some strange project that no one even understands, they come to an intersection where everybody goes, oh my God, we need this thing. And here's the person who was pulling their thread. And they say, yeah, got that thread. Something like that. I'm trying to, we have to be witnesses of the collapse, and that includes witnesses of the collapse of our understanding of humanity in the current world. And then we have to also be agents who pick up a thread and move in a meaningful way for our individual life, just as an animal would move in its individual way. And then trust that the greater imagination and the greater source of life will provide how all the big pieces go together. Just a thought I was having.
Thank you. If I can come in, George, yeah. very, very inspiring to listen to one another, and also thanks to all the comments in the chat. They're also so insightful, and so thanks also to those who are placing comments in the chat. And I would begin, now that we are widening the horizon of history, listening to to our conversation. I was thinking of Gautama Buddha, 2,600 years ago, faced with immense human suffering. He stopped for a moment. I think that's what we are trying to do. Tom, I think at the beginning raised the question of urgency, things, and it still rings in my ears this morning, but I heard from a young person, something that many of us know probably, but with regard to the climate, it's 80 years, 96 months, less than 3,000 days, or the young feeding the the sorrow and helplessness of it, But at the same time, I think there's wisdom, like in Buddha, we also having this moment when we are trying to diagnose, what is at the root of suffering. And I think what Buddha pointed out is also very much applicable today. It is the illusion of I, that I am the center of the world, And I think of much ahead, René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, modernity in a way, modern science, modern economy, and the worldview, what Heidegger would call the will to build, the image of the world, with which I think we are still living So the problem is there, we think we are the center, that our economy or the capitalistic model, or it's I who need to take the maximum amount of profit, and that is not just a person, it can be a community. Can be a nation, my country first, or it's all thinking in very egocentric ways, selfish, as we would say, but full of the false self, not the real self. As Michael was saying, the real genius. I think that the problem is there, and then the response has come from many of us. Is community. We have a different, not anthropocentric, dualistic metaphysics, but a relational metaphysics in which we say we are all in it together. I liked what Michael said about we weaving together. Reality is that I think sometimes the problem with the way we talk about climate or biodiversity. I saw it also in one of the chats in silos. Climate is one thing, biodiversity is another thing, economy is another thing. All these are connected, and that's where the community model can be very helpful. We look at the natural world, ecosystems, and the more diverse they are, they are more resilient they are. So we need to probably, wed this relational way of thinking, relational way of looking at things, and living, so we are. Other day was very moved. We had this interview with Pope Francis, and a little child, a Syrian refugee, literally shivering in the cold, and we could see, Pope Francis was shown that video without socks or bare feet in this cold, and literally shivering, and we are forgetting that we are part of a community. And when you think of some countries, the politics against migrants, are very complicated issues, but I think the basic problem is we don't feel as a community. So I think the solution is let's feel, think, and act together as a community. And I don't know, it's a moment to say, I put it also put the link in the chat. Last couple of years, inspired by Pope Francis, his landmark encyclical Laudato Si, we are proposing a Laudato Si action community platform, involving everyone. We are beginning with families, because we think the real revolution will come from community, from bottom up. So we are asking families, dioceses, parishes, our communities, schools and universities, and hundreds of universities are already joining. Loyola, Chicago, Georgetown, in Washington, many others around the world. Schools, universities, hospitals, healthcare centers, businesses, the world of economy, labor movements, agriculture, farms, then groups, movements, organizations, and religious orders. Some of you might know about the Jesuits, and the entire Jesuit family is joining this. So we are trying to inspire, and we hope to make it ecumenical, interreligious, with all people of goodwill, a community-oriented action plan. And then I think only that will solution is there, acting together. But I always go back to my point. As a scientist, I always feel alarmed. Time is running out. So let's really come together and, let's really share our ideas, our plans, and support one another, in whichever communities we are. Let's really weave communities together and refine this, again, the word rediscover, remind, reinvest, reborn, regenerate, this art of weaving together our future by weaving together our communities. Sorry if I took a bit time, Tom. Thank you very much. Just went flowing. Thank you.
Yes, Josh, thank you for the question on what can we do, or what I think the father have just said almost everything about the need for change in mindset, about the need for community spirit, about the need for us to understand that we are living in a global village. And I think that is what the pandemic has taught us, that we are living in a global village and that everything is connected. Because if you look at the pandemic, it started like a joke and we were 2 years of lockdown. Thousands, millions of people died, and it still baffles me that it has not changed much about the human behavior. That is the truth about it. We got scared and we are back to business as usual. It has not changed much. The policymakers, those who are supposed to do the policies, they've not shifted. I mean, we tried to shift and then we are almost back to where we were before the pandemic breakout. And so I don't know what is going to happen before things radically change. If we look at the outcome of the COP26 in Glasgow, and you see, when I was going to Glasgow, I knew that, yes, the pandemic has changed everything. But the same argument, the same discussions prior to the pandemic was what was still being put on the table. The same silos argument, the same argument about the need for promotion of fossil fuel, people defending their stance. Why people are dying, why we are in lockdown. So there is a real issue. And I think what can be done as a technician, I just say what can be done is about we getting our policymakers, we getting the right people in policy. We need to get the right people to make the policy changes because these politicians are so powerful. And I'm talking like this, I am working for politicians in this diplomatic powerhouse of Africa. And we just came out of the African Union Summit with the heads of state. And you see that these politicians are so powerful and they can make the changes that we are calling for. But they can't because they are held back by some interest of some multinationals, some interest of some people somewhere that we know. I can't say we don't know, we know. So I think the first thing that we can do is at the level of the policy. We need to hold our local policy makers, those we have elected, accountable. We need to make them accountable. We need to make them know that we want, I saw somebody was talking about the need for a common world. We have the Commonwealth of Nations here with the UK, but it's not common. Everything is common except the world, and so it's some system that needs to change. And it's unfortunate that we are almost now post-pandemic and nothing has changed. We are going back to our big cars, our flight, sitting in front of our TVs and things like that. But I think from the Great Green Wall perspective, what can be done? Look, there is everything that can be done. And I think Lynn said it all. There is a need for everything. If I come back to my project, I would say we need all the support as they did. There was one prime minister that made this statement. I think she was the prime minister of one of these small islands. She said, a global problem cannot be solved by a national solution, something like that. There was this woman from Barbados, the prime minister of Barbados or somewhere. And it was so true, because the Great Green Wall, what we are trying to do here is a global problem. Climate change, which is exacerbating the challenges of the drylands of Africa. If you look at statistics, shows you that the production of carbon in Africa is between 2 to 4% of the global pollution. But these vulnerable areas are receiving the biggest level of bashing from climate change. And so there's an issue of justice. There's a need for us to look at sustainability, not only from a practical point of view, but to look at it from a social justice point of view. And so what can be done? We need to have empathy. We need to know that these people who are living in these vulnerable areas, they are more of victims than anything. And we need to help them. Look, the biggest problem we have today is the issue of migration. And there's an African proverb who say, a master that does not feed its dogs cannot sleep, because the dog will bark through the night because it needs food. Today, we have massive groups of African immigrants right at the threshold of Mexico in America. We have massive group of immigrants right in Europe, where they cross the Sahara Desert, the Mediterranean Sea. They die. If they die, the young people will tell you, if they die, they die. Rather than being useless, I mean, what is the need being alive when you are useless? You are not of service to your family, you are not of service to your community. So this problem is really actually spiritual. When you talk to them, and I go to the Sahel and the Sahara region, I just came back from the Sahara region a week ago, and you still see these young people, they see their friends in the sun being buried, and they are going. And even I was in the delegation with the president of Niger, of Niger Republic, who was telling these young people, they told the president, look, we are already dead because we were useless in our compound. We are already dead because I saw my mother dying and I could not feed her. I could not buy medicine. I could not even have a bike to take her to the hospital. So what am I good for? I'm not going back. I'm going to the desert and I will cross the Mediterranean. If I die, I'm die trying. And this is deeply spiritual. And so we need to put hands together to solve the global problem, because the issue of migration will not stop. The issue of conflict will not stop. We have, and I was in a meeting, our last committee meeting last time, and I told many people, look, you cannot solve the problem that is caused by climate change by bringing in military and marines to the Sahel. We have multinational forces. There are 4,000 of them as we speak in Chad, in Mali, solving problems that have been caused mostly by climate change. They don't understand why the young people are joining the terrorist group. These young people are joining the terrorist group because these terrorist groups are offering them alternatives. They're making them feel useful. They give them money, they give them bikes, and they can feed their family even if these groups are going to kill them again. And so we cannot solve this problem by investing billions of dollars in hardware, in helicopter gunships. And we can solve this problem through nature-based solutions and by allowing nature to provide ecosystem services. So I think my clarion call here is to support such initiatives, for us to have a change of heart, for us to tell our politicians that sending American Marines to the Sahel will not solve the problem. They need to change, give the funds to those groups, those NGOs that are helping to plant trees, to bring to bring energy transition, to create green jobs, who are promoting recycling, who are promoting green, blue, white, yellow economies, rather than investing trillions of dollars in military hardware, in trying to fight the terrorist group. We can do better, and we can. And the truth about this, we have the science, we have the programs, we know, have everything, but there is an invisible hand behind that have said things must go the way they have to go. And it is only our policymakers, it is only our business people, it is only our community leaders that can bring the kind of change. But there is no, I am not discouraged, or I am not pessimistic, because when you go, you see how these villagers are trying to solve their own problems, how they are using their own indigenous knowledge, their local experience in bringing in all types of technology, all types of local, the Zai, the million, the half moon systems. They have all kinds of sophisticated systems, and this community are thriving. So I think just to end by saying, we just need to put hands together if we want to see the kind of change that we are calling for. Thank you, George.
Elvis, thank you. I want to speak to that just for a moment, because one of the things that I believe is that the reason that our policymakers and our leaders and those in multinational corporations and banks and all of the others that we blame, and sometimes rightly so, they are living disconnected from the voices of the people. And it is we, the people, who have to learn to speak again. We have to learn to re-inherit our sovereignty. We have to identify the levers of power that we have at our disposal, how we spend our dollars, who we vote for, who we pay attention to, what groups we support, and all of the rest of that. We, humanity, is failing to speak loudly and clearly and daily in all of the ways that we can speak. If there is anything that is asleep, it is the remembrance of the power that each of us has from birth, the genius that Michael talks about, that we are not utilizing in the ways that we can. We don't have to be on a great stage. We just have to open our wallet or our pocketbook at a store to know who we're voting for, what we're supporting, what we're controlling, what we're contributing to. And we have to change our individual behavior to put influence on those who supposedly are our leaders, because they are disconnected to us. And the only way we can reclaim our integrity and our sovereignty is to remind them of that by the actions that we execute every single day. That's what I believe is missing from the equation in our world today.
Very true.
What else can we share? What else can we encourage in this incredible audience that is writing away like mad men and women with their chats and their comments? You know, what else is there that we can ask of people and suggest and invite them? What are some closing thoughts, some hopes, some perspectives that we can share? Charles?
Let me defer to somebody else. There's
Okay.
nothing on the tip of my tongue right now. Thank you.
I'll say something. I just want to thank you, Elvis, for your the reality of what is not only you're facing, your continent is facing, but we're facing. And Wow, really want to thank you for that. And this thing you said about people are willing to die because they're not useful. They don't find a way to be useful. And the terrorists can give them a way to be useful, even though they may not even agree. That's such a powerful statement. And one of the things we're doing at Pachamama Alliance is Pachamama Alliance is an organization that I'm involved with, is realizing that when people aren't in action, it's not our recent realization, but I'll just say when people aren't in action, they can criticize, they can judge, they can be mad at things, they can point fingers, they can blame. But when they're actually in action, they don't have time for all that because they're making something happen, even if they're a terrorist, actually. So I'm not recommending that, but I'm just saying what we need perhaps is to give people, and this is what we're doing at Pachamama Alliance, we call them climate action trainings, so that people are trained in what climate action they can take right there in their watershed, in their house, in their neighborhood, with the trees that are standing around them. I think that's really important for us to realize that people who are in action are not taking action, just sometimes will clamor to find a way to get involved in action, even if it's the action that's hurtful, like in my own country. So much of the anger and hatred that is bubbling up to the surface in forms of actions that are totally hurtful to others. But I just, when you were talking, I was realizing, what avenues are we creating for people so that they can get in action and stop worrying about everything? You know, this wonderful phrase from Michael Beckwith, one of the great spiritual teachers in the United States, he says, worry is a form of negative prayer. And I love thinking that, because it makes me realize that when I'm worried about, and when there's free-floating anxiety everywhere and fear everywhere, in a way that's kind of a prayer for the worst possible outcome. My friend Vicki Robin does this podcast called What Could Possibly Go Right? And it's such a wonderful podcast. I think she's had you, Michael, on it. What could possibly go right? What a question. So I wanted to say that I feel from what you were saying, so many things that I want to just respond to, and it's not all together, so it's just kind of bumbling out of me. But one of the things that I've also want to say, I've been working with Suzanne Simard, the great forest ecologist, who wrote a book called Mother Tree, just a fantastic book, and she has 10 million views, I think, or something like that on her TED Talk. And her science shows the really collective power of a forest. Obviously, I work with forests, and that there are mother trees in the forest that know which trees are their kin, which trees are everybody's their kin, but which trees are their children, which trees are their nieces and nephews. And they download nutrients and wisdom and biota to those particular relatives in a particular way, and then nourish everybody around them so that they are in a healthy community of fungus and biota. And it's so inspiring to really understand from her point of view the incredible nourishing community activity of a forest. And that's actually who we are too. I started thinking, how can I be a mother tree, not only to my kids and my grandkids, but to the community, the watershed. I'm sitting here on the third floor of my house. There's trees everywhere I see in the windows. I'm right next to the Presidio. What relationship do I have with them now? What can I do right here, right now? So the whole idea of community, the whole idea of action, the whole idea of finding ways for people to not feel useless, but feel useful in a way that's directed towards the action that we all know is consistent with the integrity of our genius, of our human heart. And of course, in Indigenous communities, the good of the community is a higher ethic than the health and well-being of the individual. So in order to have the individuals thrive, the community thrives, but that's not why the community thrives. the ethic, the highest morality is the thriving of the community itself. Yet we individuate so much in our Western way that we individuate at the expense of the community, the complete opposite. And how to turn that around, how to Ubuntu us, to use your term from South Africa, how to find that, because it's in every single one of us. Everybody knows that, they can feel it. I don't know, I'm just very moved by what you said, Elvis, and wanted to respond, even though I don't have it together to respond.
I think, Lynn, you responded perfectly about this. And I think, and I believe very strongly in the community spirit and the need to feel useful. And if you want to really see the need to feel useful, you see these young people that just want to be useful, whatever they have to do to feel like they are contributing to their society. And so they become victims of gangs, victims of drug pushers, victims of everything that is bad. But that is not the end of the story. They also become ecopreneurs. We have phenomenal young people that are doing a lot to bring positive solutions to the challenges that they're facing in their communities. We have hundreds of young people that have organized themselves into various groups, from 1 billion trees to Green Gambia to Indigenous knowledge groups, all types of groups. And the young people are conscious of the fact that they are the owners. They are the ones that can actually make the change that they want to see. So so it's also a story of positivity. There's a lot of positive action. If you visit some of the groups, you visit some of the communities, like what I did last week in the northern part of Dakar, where you see these women, you think they are suffering, they are planting, they are harvesting, they have drums, they are playing and they are dancing, which also make you to think the value of the world. Because when I go to these communities and I always come back, you drive all these cars and you ask them, these people are so happy, and despite the challenges that they have, they live in a community, they feed each other. Their only challenge now is the impact of climate change. That is changing them. It's sending many of them to the urban centers where there is no soul, where they are going to be raped, they are going to be tortured, some of them are going to be killed, while trying to look for money to buy seeds, resistant seeds, to go back to their community. So they have all these adaptation approaches and methodology that they use to stay fit. If you come to Addis Ababa now, as we speak, you will see a lot of beggars on the street. And people just say, oh, these are lazy beggars. I say, no, these are not lazy beggars. These are people, because this is the fallow system in the farms. They have allowed their farms on fallow. They are coming to the cities. The only thing they can do to be useful is to stand by the street near the red light to beg for peanuts and for anything that anybody can give them. And within the next 3 months, they are going back with bags of seeds. They will have money to buy small ruminants, to buy small animals, where they are going to work and feed their family in the next few months. And those are adaptation strategies that people don't see. And so I think to say what we can do, we can, look, Lynn, we can help these people, George. We, as you asked, we can do anything. The biggest challenges that we have in this program, apart from the funds, and I think the funds are so important, but the knowledge is also very important. We are living in a global world, which means the knowledge, the experience that you have in the Amazon link is the experience that can help somebody in a community in northern Nigeria, in Maiduguri, in the Lake Chad region, which is now, Lake Chad region is now 7% of its initial size 60 years ago, Lynn. 93% is gone. And if you imagine that this region it has 40 million people that directly depends on this lake, you will understand why the Lake Chad region have the Boko Haram, the ACME, call any Islamic terrorist drug trafficking name the Lake Chad, because they have cheap labor. But that is not the end of the story. We have the most magnificent projects that are bringing a lot of changes in that region. And so when you go there with the bad feeling, you come back feeling, it's not all that bad. And I think that is the spirit we need to move from this discussion, that it is difficult, but it is not impossible. What we can do to support, let's do it. Let's not think about it. Let's not say, not everybody is Jeff Bezos' foundation that is going to give $1 billion for restoration. Not everybody is a billionaire. No, but everybody can give you a pence. You can give you a widow's mite. And I have to conclude by calling on Father Joshua. I met the Pope in Ireland during the World Family Day, I think just before the pandemic, in Dublin. And I was invited by the Laudato Si Foundation, and we talk about how to work together, how to use the Laudato Si to preach, to ensure that the religious community, both the clergy and the Christians and the Muslims and all those who are around us, come, to take the story. I use the story of St. Francis to teach my children about ecology and the need and the interlinkages that exist between us. So Pope Francis have been fundamental, tremendous in supporting the whole idea of sustainable land management and restoration in Africa, especially through the Great Green Wall. And so it's a story of hope. Josh, it's tribulations, but it's hope, because we have the solutions and we can do something to bring the change that we want to see. And a lot is being done. We just need to do more, because the climate is changing faster. And the challenges linked to climate change and change in weather patterns are multi-layer. So we need all kinds of human and material support to keep on doing what we are doing today within the framework of the Great Green Wall. Thank you very much, Joyce. And thank you, Tom, for the invitation.
Thank you, Elvis. Thank you all. As we bring this incredible dialogue to a close, I'd just like to invite each of you to share a brief observation or brief closing comments to our time together today. Father Josh, would you like to?
Okay. Sure, Tom. Thank you. Now, what struck me that the word was humility. I think it's Charles who used it. And humility, as we know, comes from humus. It's in Latin, in Adama, in Hebrew, is earth. And as Elvis was just mentioning, I was just thinking, I was struck by his hope, and I too tend to be hopeful. And it's enough to look at this humble movements all around the world. I think of these days of Bangladesh, the way Dhaka is 20 million people coming very, very creative, and around the world there are thousands of them. So let us, feel hopeful looking at these humble projects. And I think, the Spirit's God always works from below, not from very big people or small little communities, humble communities, and that's the message I would like to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Lynn?
Let's see, very provocative and moving and panel. I'm very grateful to everyone here. And I'll just say that in many ways, I think one way of looking at the pandemic is that it's morning sickness for a species that is going to be pregnant or is pregnant and wants to be reborn. Wants to be reborn in a new kind of human being, a new kind of species that is humble, that is earth honoring, that is that sees its place in the community of life. That's one way of looking at what's going on, and perhaps we're in the birth canal, and not every pregnancy gives birth to a baby, but we have that opportunity, and I think we can reborn, and I think that's in many ways what we're talking about here.
Thank you, Lynn. Albus?
I think, as a final thought, I think I leave this discussion very, very hopeful. Hopeful because of the depth, the connection that I have felt from when Michael was speaking its poem, from what Charles said, from the experience of Father and Lynn, and also the intervention from George. So I feel refreshing that there is a lot of hope and there's a lot of good that can come out of this kind of sharing. And I wouldn't thank you enough. And I still said, I don't know where you got to connect with me, Tom. I just received a mail from you and I like, this sounds, there's something to learn from any discussion that I have. And I can't be grateful enough for you giving me this opportunity to talk about this human endeavor to bring the change and the kind of world that we want. So I would just say, I'm very hopeful, and I thank everybody, the 100 and something people that are talking to us and all of the panel. And I really hope that in the next Humanity Rising, we will be there again. Maybe next time, if you tell me early enough, I can organize so that it's some of the women groups, and the women are the main actors in this in building this great green wall, if I can put it that way. Most of the men are in the cities trying to send money back home, and the women remain in the community. So next time I will want to see this, I would suggest that let's do this in such a way that we can all intervene from our farms, from the field, where we can sit with this community and talk to the audience together. I think it's going to make a lot of, I just see these women that I was with last week telling you their stories from the field. And the good thing, the wonders is we have now internet connectivity everywhere. It's not as good at times, but it works in many of these communities. So thank you very much. And I feel very hopeful, and I want to stay in touch with everyone in this group to talk more and see how we can share more. And I'm always in the US, in Italy, and some of these places for all kinds of meetings. So thank you very much. And I hope to meet some of you, and we keep talking. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Elvis. Michael?
To go back to the beginning and the idea of remembering what has been forgotten. So the word memory comes from the ancient Greek, from a goddess, Mnemosyne. And Mnemosyne was also the mother of the muses. In other words, part of remembering what has been forgotten involves remembering our connection to creativity, to art. And the muses actually involve not just music, which would be obvious, and painting and everything like that. It also involves science. And so in a sense, remembering that science is an art before it is a technological process. And that might help us use science in more creative ways of weaving rather than the ways of distinguishing. And then following the notion of ancient memory and thinking about prophecy, which Lynn was bringing in. My understanding of prophecy is not predicting the future simply. Prophecy used to mean standing in the river of time in such a present way that the things forgotten in the past come to a person as well as glimpses of the future coming to a person. So in reimagining prophecy, we have to, in some ways, imagine ourselves standing in the river of time. If we can be present enough, we can recollect ancient forgotten memory of how to be reconnected to life in all the meaningful ways, and we can get glimpses of the future that are what is needed, I think, more than a strategic plan. So I'm just trying to provide a sense of hope connected to the possibility of very deep remembering, which involves imagining and creativity, as well as being able to live in connection to the past and to the future.
Thank you, Michael. Charles?
Yeah, I was profoundly moved by Elvis's words, which landed me in this place of we really do not know what to do when we see all of the different aspects of the crisis of humanity, how deeply lost we are, how deeply forgetting we are. And I think that it is good to pause in the place of we don't know what to do, because the rush to a solution very often is just a reenactment of the kinds of mentalities and ways of doing things that got us into the problem to begin with, especially when it is a single unitary solution that is based on controlling one thing that we can count and measure. And that could be carbon dioxide. And when we focus on that, it blinds us to the totality of our situation. I mean, even a lot of things that are attributed to global warming are actually caused by excessive drawdown of water and abuse of soil. These things tend to get overlooked. And then the solutions that come from this obsessive focus on carbon actually end up doing even more damage sometimes. Like in Africa, all the mega dams that are draining vast wetlands and disturbing the water cycle. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that more than I did, but just to call for to linger in the place of having no idea what to do, being confused, being bewildered, being lost. And then when we know what to do, then maybe doing something.
You have all been just terrific, each in your own way, adding notes to this symphony of understanding that we can all chew on and try to integrate and work with. So I'm deeply grateful that you have been part of this conversation, and we look forward to many more on so many different levels. Thank you so very, very much. Tom, do you have anything you want to say before Jim comes back in?
Just an immense sense of gratitude for each of you, not just what you shared today, but your life's work. It's you each are gifts to the world, and I just want to profoundly thank you.
Jim.
Wow, what a extraordinary dialogue today. Thank you all so very, very much. And I think I would just conclude by just making a couple of comments. First, Elvis, that image of young people feeling so useless that they turned to terrorism in order to feel useful kind of struck me right in my heart today. And I just want to acknowledge it because it's a measure of how lost we are. It's a measure of how much we've forgotten. And it just made me think of the documentaries I've seen of the, children soldiers and the poverty around the world and the urban blight and the deepening alienation on the part of our youth as they try to recover, but the forgetfulness of the larger culture is stronger than their capacity to remember because they're so young and they're not initiated into the pathways of remembering. So I just want to honor that very poignant image. And then secondly, I think, Lynn, you're calling in the prophecies, and Michael's your notion that what prophecy actually does for us, it enables us to stand in the river of time and remember the insights of our ancestors. And in the remembering, we can actually see the future. That the gift of seeing the future is actually a capacity of remembering where we were in former ages. And I just wanted to underscore that point because I think, Lynn, you're bringing in the deep prophetic nature of our moment, that we're in a kairos moment where so much is at stake, so much is now called for on each and every one of us within the context, as you pointed out, Father, of a metaphysic now of relatedness. And that's the only way we're going to make it through, is in a deep understanding that we're all in this together. And it's only in community that we will see the redemption that we so powerfully seek. Someone in the chat said that it was Thich Nhat Hanh that said the next Buddha will be a Sangha. The next Buddha is us. And that's both a humbling thought, but it's an audaciously empowering, optimistic thought. And then the final comment, Charles, I thought you made a powerful point in your opening to say that the people who think they're awake are actually the ones who are asleep. And within that context, I just want to go back to Plato and to Socrates, who was one of the first people to write on this. And Socrates said that that's right. Anyone who thinks they have the answer is actually the fastest asleep. And you may remember that a friend of his went to the Oracle of Delphi and asked who's the wisest man in Athens, and they said Socrates. And the man was very excited and he came running back to Athens. He said, Socrates, the Oracle of Delphi says you're the wisest person in Athens. And Socrates says, well, that must be because I'm the only one in Athens who knows that he does not know. And that's why living in the questions in the spirit of truth pursued, rather than in the answers in the spirit of truth possessed, needs to be our watchword now. And I think, Charles, you're making a very, very incisive recommendation to us all at this moment. Instead of running around with all the answers, we want to foist on everybody else to solve climate change. Probably the most important and salvific thing we can do is just stop and fall to our knees in the deepest spirit of humility and recognize we've lost track and we no longer even know which way to go. And if somehow we could foster that deep spirit of humility in its most profound way, we would probably find ourselves standing up in the river of time, remembering for the first time who we most essentially are. And so I just want to thank all of you for one of the more profound sessions that we've had in some time on Humanity Rising, because I think you've taken us to a certain bedrock of awareness. And I just want to thank you all for that. Tom, do you want to just say a quick word about tomorrow, and then we'll close the session?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And once again, thank you to each of you for joining us in the dialogue today. It's been an extraordinary conversation. George and I have been picking up on something Michael shared at the beginning. We've been picking up the threads of the dialogue and the conversations this week, and have been weaving together a beautiful fabric. And we're delighted to have Dr. Vandana Shiva joining us tomorrow to continue to bring more threads to the fabric of the weaving of this conversation this week on endangered. So thank you all. We'll be beginning tomorrow at the same time with George and myself, Jim, and Dr. Vandana Shiva to share the fabric of what's been woven throughout this week.
And Tom, maybe if we're really lucky, a black dog will come along tonight and pull at the fabric, and we can start all over again tomorrow. So, blessings.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Tom, Lynn, Father Josh, Michael, Charles, and Elvis. Thank you so much. One final thought is just that the term, the age of the great forgetting, just so we have proper attribution, was Michael Meade. So Michael, thank you for that term. It's opened up an extraordinary opportunity for deep dialogue, as we've seen today. All of you are welcome to the after chat session if you'd like to join. The link is in the chat box. Stan is just putting it in. Everyone's welcome. And we'll see you tomorrow for Vandana Shiva for our fifth and final session of Endangered. Thank you all so much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.